Luvu stared at the video playing. The subject was standing in a bare room, brushed metal walls, lights in the ceiling. Its breath was steaming out in front of it, and it was hugging itself with its arms as it shivered. The temperature was below the freezing point for water, and the subject had been, well, subjected to the temperature and humidity for over 2 hours, its body temperature beginning to finally drop. The subject no longer kept moving, no longer used physical effort to keep up its internally generated body temperature. As Luvu watched, the subject sat down. Its head rested on its folded arms that were on its knees. It went still. Medical crews rushed in, wrapping it in warm cloths, working to bring up its body temperature. Luvu turned off the video with a flute of disgust, then opened up another one. This time the temperature was high, over 322 degrees, true measurement. The subject had found a spot to sit down and was not moving. As Luvu watched the sped-up footage, it eventually quit sweating liquid to cool itself through evaporation. It began to babble, then wander, then collapsed. Again, medics rushed in. Luvu closed the file and opened another. Air pressure tests. Another. Atmosphere gas mixture tests. Another. How long it could go without nourishment, without ill effect. Another. How long it could go without sleep. Another. How long it could go without dihydrogen monoxide. All scientific experiments to test the subject's endurance and the extremes it could survive, and for how long. Luvu gnashed his teeth, keeping his hard rubbery lips between his legs clamped shut even as he ground his flat herbivore teeth. He looked up at Chief Scientific Senior over Director Olglugu. "This is monstrous." The Scifi fluttered their fronds in agreement. "That psychopath Yuanviolulu approved of all of these," Luvu stated, his fronds curled tightly in outrage. "This is the kind of testing you would do on a lab animal in the ancient times. All of those could have been determined through biological scans at rest." Luvu stood up from the stool and scuttled over to the window, looking out at the clear, dry day. "This is a forerunner, not an animal, not a laboratory specimen. It is a member of an intelligent, star-faring species who had mastered faster than light travel, while our people were still running across the plains to avoid the great wildfires." Olglugur fluttered his fronds again. "We have methods that we can use that Yuanviolulu and his gaggle of now obvious psychopaths would never use," Luvu stated. "It is arriving," Olglugur fluted. Luvu moved over to another terminal, bringing it up. He watched as the forerunner snatched away the headsets, then broke the beam ray pistol. "It instigated that response purposefully," Olglugur said. "Yes, to see if it could trick its guards into deploying their weaponry, then test how durable the weaponry is," Luvu said. He grasped 2 hands together. It was judging whether its intellectual predictive model would work on our species. "It appears to have," Olglugu agreed. "That plotter Yuanviolulu and his pet psychopaths believe that the Forerunner does not possess enough neural tissue for advanced pattern recognition or action-to-action predictive analysis," Luvu stated. "Look how it de-escalates the situation by looking out the window." "Can it see through the fog?" Olglugu asked. Luvu nodded. "I chose today to move it just because of the fog." A non-invasive examination of its optic systems showed what wavelengths and frequencies it could see. A rather wide band of the light spectrum, edging almost into the infrared and ultraviolet. Olglugu nodded. "So can it see through today's fog?" Luvu nodded. "For us, the high moisture content causes light refraction among our visible light wavelengths. However, to the Forerunner, it can see enough other spectrums that are only mildly affected by the humidity, so while it might be a bit blurred at a distance, the technicians at Optical Visual Sciences believe it can see, not only shapes, but nearly 150 million colors." Olglugur made a staccato whistling sound of being impressed. By its vision, our rather unimpressively colored bodies would be full of swirls and patterns of vibrant, clashing colors, Levu said. They triggered another monitor, and a Lurksu appeared, its body banded and swirled by colors that shimmered and sparkled among the gray, brown, yellow and blue that a Lurksu could normally see. It used glittering and sheen to differentiate. Of course, they see about 1,000,000 times what we see, Levu said. We must look strange to their eyes, Ulglugu said. He nodded at how the Forerunner sat quietly as the safety restraints, custom designed for it, were undone and the Forerunner was encouraged to leave the safety of the vehicle's passenger compartment. I too would be hesitant to trust such bizarrely colored creatures who are so different than me. No fronds, although the hair does suggest a slight parallel evolution there. Only 2 eyes, but look at how close they are. That's binocular vision for depth perception we require 3 eyes and our fronds for, Levu stated. He gave a fluting sigh. She, and it is female, by the way, she is a remarkable specimen of planetary evolution. She, reminds me of a dual-handed plains spear. Deadly and efficient to be respected, Ulglugu said. She's beautiful. Yes, she is. Yunvilulu stared at the video sent to him by those unevolved cretins from the Office of Scientific Inquiry, grinding his teeth in a steady monotonous sound that did nothing to reduce his anger. No scientific method was being used in the video he was watching. It learned nothing about the subject. It asked no questions, searched for no answers. In the video, the subject was taken from a transport, where it had been manacled to the wall and put on a hard plank of plasteel to act as a seat that would have left a Lurksu in agony for days. The subject moved into the blank grey fog of high humidity. It looked around slowly, and the guards, none of them wearing headpieces for communication, all of them holding beam projectors, waited for it to stop looking around. Once it had looked around, the one holding the sting beam moved in front, making a follow motion with its rear 2 hands. The subject followed, and the quartet moved through the fog. Twice the guards moved far enough away from the subject that the camera lost sight of them. Only computer assistance and thermal imaging allowed the camera to show where the 3 Lurksu were. The subject followed easily, even when directional shifts were made by one or the other Lurksu motioning with the hands nearest the subject. The subject showed a faint flicker of emotion, a quirking of the corners of its lips, a pinching of the nostrils, the 4th time the directions were changed. According to the mini-map in the upper right, they were just leading the subject around cars in the parking lot in a wandering pattern. What did that prove? That it could possibly see in the fog? That the corrosive dihydrogen monoxide factory pollution did not bother the subject even when subjected to 70% humidity? His office had proven that. Finally, the group reached the door. The keypad was punched in, and the Lurksu in the lead pulled on the lever. It didn't move. The Lurksu fluted annoyance and tried again. It put effort into it. It hung off the lever, making fluting noises of anger. The subject reached forward, grabbed the end of the lever, and slowly applied its strength. On the side, the force measurement rapidly moved up. Yunvilulu stared at the numbers. The subject was putting more force on the handle than a Lurksu weighed, with one hand and leaning forward slightly off balance. The lever finally moved with a loud crack. A tiny air cylinder blew rust out. The subject looked at the greyish rust powder on its finger and shook its head before wiping the rust off on its pant leg. The lights inside were dim. The subject was led down the hallways, and Yunvilulu wondered if the Office of Scientific Inquiry was going to put it in a proper holding pen. Tests had determined that 4 featureless walls, a featureless floor, and a smooth ceiling, 3 times as high as an average Lurksu, would be perfectly acceptable quarters for the specimen. Instead, there was strange furniture. There was several macroplas windows that showed either outside the building or recordings of nature. The guards moved over, opening drawers, showing clothing, towels, sheets, blankets. They showed the subject the latrine facilities, the water shower, then left, making a show of locking the door. The video cut off. Yuan Villalu shook his head. Nothing scientific about anything those heavy-handed clumsy brutes were doing. There was no laboratory controls, no scientific method, no carefully metered and measured environment. He wondered just what those morons who worked for the Marshal Department thought they could learn. Lu Vu watched the monitor, Chief Scientific Senior over Director Olglugu and several members of the Dominion High Senate next to him. The Forerunner, one Kartor, was sitting in the strange S-like chair. On the table in front of her was a glass full of dihydrogen monoxide mixed with citric acid and fructose, full of frozen dihydrogen monoxide. "So, she needs the liquid to maintain bodily functions?" one of the senators asked. "The Dominion Intelligence Services research projects determined that," Lu Vu said. "The additives actually are needed to maintain bodily function." "Very acidic," another senator said, shaking its fronds. "It has some strange needs," Lu Vu said. "We noticed that exposure to ultraviolet wavelengths cause it to produce a needed substance. The substance is produced endogenously when ultraviolet wavelengths touch, expose the skin, and trigger vitamin D synthesis within her body." "Strange," the senator said. "We believe it evolved under a stellar mass that produced significant UV and IR radiation that was allowed through the atmosphere," Sisod Olglugu said. "We posit a high axial tilt producing highly energetic and variable weather changes." "Even curioser," the other senator said. "It enjoys walking around in precipitation, high winds, and other weather phenomenon," Olglugu stated. "We determined that the way it tilted its head to raise its face to precipitation was an act of pleasure." "It does not seem well designed for defense," another senator stated. "Its epidermis looks soft, unlike our complex polymer epidermis of cellulose and lignin." Olglugu shook his fronds. "Do not be fooled, Senator. Its skeleton is a rigid combination of calcium phosphate loaded into a collagen framework with air spaces to increase strength, while the collagen provides flexibility to the bone. It possesses 3 dermal layers to our single layer. While its epidermis may be easily punctured or bruised, it heals much faster than our own." The senator nodded. "That was determined by the DSRP, not by our tests," Lu Vu said. The subject took a long drink from the glass, setting it down and looking back at the window, which showed the rippling waves of grass from one of the main plains. "Did the DSRP measure its intellect?" a senator asked. "It refused to cooperate," Lu Vu stated. "It uses passive resistance when at all possible, often just falling limp to the floor." He rustled his fronds in humor. "It weighs much more than it looks, and its mass and body structural makeup make it very unwieldy to move." "What do you determine its intelligence to be?" the senator asked, leaning forward. She is fastidious," wiping her mouth as well as the condensation from the table. "High. Sentience and sapience are obvious in her movements and decisions," Olglugu stated. "Observation has shown us much." "Her responses are informative," Lu Vu stated. "I was told it was just repeating the same thing over and over," the first senator said. Lu Vu nodded. "Yes. However, we of the Marshal Department figured it out." The senators all looked. "She is a member of the Forerunner military, unsure as who has taken possession of her. She considers herself a prisoner and is only responding with the same information over and over." "Which is?" a senator asked. "We have determined that the first set of words is her name, with her last name first. Then her rank. Then her social identification number or its equivalent. Then her nation. Then a declaration that she is a member of the military, and then her branch of military," Lu Vu said. "Quite like what we teach our own soldiers to say in captivity." The senator nodded. "We of the Defense Research Projects believe that she had been trained to repeat only that information even under torture or threat of death," Lu Vu stated. "As that is the only thing she utters, we believe the training was intense." The senators nodded. That is why we requested that she, the subject Kotor, be turned over to us, Luvu said. The senators all nodded their fronds. One scurried back and turned to look at the other monitor. The Forerunner was asleep, in a dimly lit room, a heavy blanket over her. She was tossing and turning in her sleep. Luvu moved over next to the senator. It appears she endures periods of unconsciousness, where her brain processes a wide variety of information, Luvu stated. He touched a blank screen, and the data came up in greys and pale yellows. Right now she is some kind of unconscious state where her brain is processing audio, visual, and tactile sensations while she is engaged in decision processes. Weird, a senator said. Without these periods of unconsciousness, she begins to suffer psychologically according to tests performed by the DSRP. She also suffers organ instability as well as digestive issues, Ulglugur stated. A phasically sensitive scientist stated she is partially cognitively aware and experiencing a surreal type of virtually reality generated by her brain. This apparently processes unconscious and conscious neurological functions. Ulglugur leaned against the wall, pressing on it with two arms. Unlike our hibernation period, her brain is always functioning at what we would consider a high level. The senator fluted, fluttering their fronds. Wait, what was that? Everyone turned to the monitor to see the Forerunner sitting up in bed, covered in moisture. Her hands were shaking, and she wiped her forehead with one cloth-clad arm. Luvu rewound the footage. The Forerunner was sleeping, clenching and unclenching her hands. She suddenly lunged up, one hand held in front of her, a nearly closed fist held up. She made a yanking downward motion with her right hand, all as she lunged up. What was that? A senator asked. Luvu examined the biometrics. Spike in adrenaline, cortisol, anxiety. High brain activity. Long-term memory shifts into active memory. He looked up. Her neural virtual reality must have been anxiety-inducing. One senator moved over to another monitor while the others stared. You aren't going to do experiments upon it while it is still under anxiety? A senator asked. Any results would be inconclusive as well as risk a violent self-defense response, Luvu stated. The DSRP have already done it, and she reacted violently. That senator nodded. What is this? A senator asked, pointing at the 2.5D LCD screen. It's something interesting, Luvu stated, moving over to it. The rescue emergency pod had, aboard it, a virtual intelligence assistant. The DSRP brought it online, but had severely limited its processing ability and spent more time keeping it dormant so they could go over the code. They would bring it online briefly, then shut it down and try to examine the coding. What is it doing now? The senator asked, tapping the screen. That's a touch-sensitive screen, Senator, Luvu said. He moved over. The virtual intelligence is still in the possession of the DSRP, but, for reasons unknown, it has recently begun communicating with me despite the DSRP has possession of it. And it is using this screen? The senator asked. Luvu nodded. It appears that its core coding has migrated to our own servers and merely communicates with the DSRP through several relays. It was on multiple monitors, but I made sure that it would only use this touch screen. How? The senator asked, looking at the screen in curiosity. Hello. Senator Uplampula was burning on the screen in ochre letters. There was a flashing box. Hello, virtual intelligence. Go ahead, Luvu said. The senator tapped the box. I hope your day is pleasant. The senator turned to Luvu. How did you convince it to stop migrating and penetrating other computer systems, which was the problem the DSRP kept reporting? Luvu shrugged. I asked it.